Patisa Samuppada, Dependent Origination, talk number 8. Phassa Pichya Vedana. Because of mental contact as condition, feeling arises. Mental contact phassa, feeling vedana. This is the sixth link of the dependent origination we are talking. As we all know, even though the same word is used in different links, based on the condition, there are changes, slight changes, variations. Keep that in mind. And also, it is not one condition or one cause, one effect. Many conditions or many causes produce many effects. We are discussing the key points, the main points of these causes and effects. So, in this sixth link, both mental factors, cetasika, phassa, mental contact, and vedana, feeling. Those are cetasika, mental factors. They arise together. Mental contact is the vivid experience of the coming together of external object, internal object, and corresponding consciousness. Mental contact is the vivid experience of the coming together of external object, internal object, and the corresponding consciousness. That is phassa, mental contact. Now, vedana, feeling. Vedana, feeling, is the thorough and complete experience of the sense object. Feeling is the thorough and complete experience of the sense objects. Our elder has explained about this by using an analogy or example between a chef and the king. Okay, the king has his own chef. The chef cooks many dishes for the king to partake. So when he's cooking for the king, he tastes all the dishes to make sure that it's good. Taste here, taste there. And then, of course, finally offer to the king. The king sit at his table and enjoyed it thoroughly. Every flavor, every taste, every morsel to his delights. So in here, the taste that the chef has is comparable to mental contact, and that thorough and complete enjoyment, thorough and complete experience of the meal by the king is feeling Vedana. As such, one need to understand between feeling and mental contact. So here feeling, English word is a feeling. This English word feeling is the translated for the Pali word Vedana. Okay. It does not represent the true meaning, but that is the word that has been accepted. Vedana, Pali word. Feeling, English word. So this Vedana, okay, it is the experience of pleasant object which is enjoyable, and the experience of unpleasant object which is suffering. That is what Vedana means. It's the experience of the pleasant object which is enjoyable, and experience of the unpleasant object which is not enjoyable, or you can say suffering. That enjoyment or suffering is Vedana. So whenever you heard the meaning, whenever you heard the word feeling, one should understand as such. It is the experience of the sense object. There are 6 kinds of feeling that correspond to the 6 kinds of mental contact. We have discussed mental contact in the last talk. There are 6 kinds of mental contacts. So correspondingly, there are 6 kinds of Vedana feeling. So let's use as a seeing as an example here. At the moment of seeing, there is the I consciousness, and also mental contact, and also feeling. 3 things are there at the moment of seeing. When one sees something, there's a consciousness that is aware of it. There must be a mental contact, phassa, and also that one will be experiencing the feeling. So what kind of feeling? It depends based on the nature of the object. If the nature of the object is good, pleasant feeling, ugly or bad, unpleasant feeling, or neutral feeling. So one or the other of these 3 kinds of feeling will arise at the moment of seeing based on the nature or quality of the object. If the mental contact is strong and powerful, the feeling will be also strong and powerful. But if the mental contact is weak, okay, there will be a very weak feeling, or not at all, a very weak feeling, or no feeling at all. So that feeling arises out of the seeing is called feeling born out of eye contact. Specific feeling born out of eye contact. In Pali it's called Sakku Sampassaja. Sakku is eye, Passa is contact, Vedana is feeling. Feeling born out of eye contact. Sakku Sampassaja Vedana. So this is from seeing. And the same way you can explain other cases too. Hearing, okay, smelling, tasting, touch sensations. Basically, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, smell consciousness, or tongue consciousness. These consciousness are the one that is arising corresponding to the object and their basis. As the way we just explained for seeing, you can explain for the hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. We talk about strong contact and strong feeling. To give an example, let's say you have a cold, your nose plugged. At that time, there might be all sorts of smell going around. Because of this cold, the mental contact of the smell is weak. So you can't smell, or you could hardly smell. The same thing, normally you can taste, you can enjoy all the flavor of the food that you eat. Sometimes you got sick and you lost appetite. And when you lost appetite, what happened? Whatever you eat there's no taste. It's blur, tasteless. That mental contact is weak, so the feeling is also weak. Just to give you a few examples. In Abhidhamma, in Buddhism, you can study through sutra or sutta discourses. And also you can study through Abhidhamma, or the higher learning or the higher teaching, Buddhist philosophy and psychology. In the sutta, it is taught on a person level. In the Abhidhamma, everything is in the process, non-personal, impersonal. So it is Buddha presented in a different way, more acutely precise. In the Abhidhamma and in the sutta, it's the way that layperson can understand, and in some cases he buried a few links or left out a few links because it can be understood without that link as well. So in here we are going to talk about this in terms of what is Abhidhamma, in Abhidhamma how it explained. In Abhidhamma, this eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness. Okay. In other words, seeing here consciousness, hearing consciousness, smelling consciousness, tasting consciousness. Those four types of physical sense consciousness, physical base sense consciousness are accompanied by neutral feeling. Whenever at the moment of seeing, the first moment of seeing, the feeling is neutral. The same thing with hearing, smelling, and tasting. But the body consciousness or touch consciousness is accompanied by pleasant or unpleasant, sukha vedana or dukkha vedana, pleasant feeling or unpleasant feeling. It's very specific. Eye, ear, nose, tongue, neutral feeling. Body, pleasant or unpleasant feeling. However, this is what the Buddha has taught us in Abhidhamma. Only Buddha alone could see or experience consciousness, by individual consciousness, even though they arises and pass away, so to speak, 17, 20 billion of a second. But he has the ability to see and experience consciousness by consciousness. But for all of us, we cannot. So to speak, we have to just take it on faith, because we can't reach there. But we can identify, okay? Most of us can identify. What we can identify is the obvious thought unit. We can identify a obvious thought unit after we run through, after we note through, after we observe through a few thought processes. You have to observe the whole thought process quite a few times, and we can identify some obvious thought units that we can. So from that inference, we can quite safely say and understand what Buddha have taught us from his experience of individual consciousness. So when we run through this thought process a few times, okay, we will come to know investigating consciousness. You can just sense it, you can just feel it, that investigating nature. And also jhana, which is the translated as impulsion or swift consciousness, or you can call it active consciousness, the one who is in the operating, walking, actually on the ground in the field. That's a jhana, impulsion. You can experience those too. Investigating consciousness, this swift consciousness, and also registering consciousness. You can actually feel and sense these things. If you go through a thought process quite a few times, you will hit on those buttons. So by inferences, we can say there is the pleasant feeling or unpleasant feeling or neutral feeling at the moment of seeing, hearing, smelling, and tasting. Touch, very obvious. We just simply know when there's a touch. It will be pleasant or unpleasant, but you distinctly know. But the first four, you will come to experience only after a few runs of observation. And the elders, he explained to us, okay, the frequency of pleasant feeling, the frequency of pleasant feeling or unpleasant feeling that we are facing in this life. Where does this feeling come from? From the objects. So in other words, the frequency of the pleasant objects or unpleasant objects we are going to come face to face in this life is the result of the past karma, all the wholesome, unwholesome actions that we have done in the past. In other words, we program with those actions on how many or how much pleasant objects will come to face or unpleasant object will come to face, which is translated into feeling, pleasant and unpleasant feeling. So, for practical purpose, feeling can be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral at the moment of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. Even though the Buddha said the first four are neutral, at a level for practical purpose, at the moment of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, there is pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feeling. We keep talking about neutral feeling. Okay? Pleasant, unpleasant is quite distinct and obvious. Neutral feeling, it's the most difficult. It's the most difficult to perceive. This neutral feeling is because it is very subtle feeling, supremely fine and subtle feeling. Neutral feeling is. It may be known by inferences. Okay. Let's say you're feeling pleasant and suddenly the bad news come in and you feel unpleasant. So pleasant feeling suddenly switch into unpleasant feeling. But of course, on that switch, it has to pass through a zone of neutrality, neutral feeling. So between the pleasant feeling and unpleasant feeling, there is a neutral feeling. So by inferences, one can know the neutral feeling. And also, people who are mature in this mindfulness insight practice, quite a mature person, okay, the neutral feeling between the pleasant and unpleasant feeling, they can accurately observe it. The first one is, for most of us, only by inferences we know. But when you become very mature in this practice, you can accurately know. It become obvious. Neutral feeling become obvious between the pleasant and unpleasant feeling. And also another thing we should keep in mind, we are practicing, a lot of us are practicing, and then one might say, I'm practicing, or I'm doing this, or I'm doing that. But there's no feeling, I don't feel anything. I don't feel good, I don't feel bad, no pleasant. I don't feel anything. In fact, when you say I don't feel anything, you are actually experiencing neutral feeling. So keep that in mind as well. That is related to neutral feeling, upekha vedana, neutral feeling. Now, let's move on and see. To understand, okay, feeling born out of mind contact, feeling born out of mind contact. Because we have already talked about feeling born out of eye contact, ear contact, nose contact, tongue contact, body contact. Those are physical source, so it is one category, 5 physical sense source. But there's another source, the sixth sense. The sixth sense is the mind sense. So for that, there's also a feeling born out of mind contact. Okay? In Pali, it's called Nama Sampasaja Vedana, feeling born out of mind contact. For this, we need to know, or we need to understand how a thinking consciousness, or simply say thought, thinking consciousness or thought arises. How does this thinking consciousness arises? It's a bit different from the first 5 physical sense consciousness. So that's why we discuss separately. A little bit different. First of all, of course, you have to have a mental contact. To have a mental contact, you need a mental object. Okay, mental object. So what is this mental object? In a layman term, I quite literally put it as the recall power in your mind of the previous incidents, recall power of the previous conditions, situations, or thoughts even. You can recall these things. That is the mental object. Or it can be, or it is, a mental construct. You're constructing in your mind mental construct of fantasies and fictions. Mental construct of fantasies and fictions. Let's say you're reading a fiction book. It's so intense. It comes into the mind, all the feelings from the storyline. That is the mental constructs from fictions, and so from fantasies. That's the mental object. And these fantasies and fictions and recalls of the previous thoughts and incidents, they become so vivid in your mind eye, the mind eye, so vivid in the mind eye, even though these do not really exist. they affect you emotionally. Even though they don't exist in reality, these become vivid and affected you emotionally. So these emotions are feelings born out of mind contact. That is what is the mental object is. So in other words, we can put it, what is mental objects? Mental objects are the one that can be experienced by mind only. Or mental objects, all mental objects can be experienced only by mind. Not any other way, only the mind can experience it. So this is, on a practical purpose, that's how I put, how a layman would understand what mental objects is. In Pali, Dhamma Ramana, Dhamma Aramana. Dhamma is Dhamma, Aramana is object. Dhamma Ramana, mental object. But in the scriptures, okay, it's quite clearly stated, not the way we put it. In the scriptures, it's stated like this: 16 subtle physical phenomena is mental object. Interesting, it said physical. 16 subtle physical phenomena. Pali word is Sukkuma Rupa. So what are these 16s? The first is 5 sensitivities. 5 sensitivities. What are these sensitivities? Eye sensitivity, ear, nose, tongue, and body. Sensitivity. But how could, let's say, one is in an old age, your eyesight power is failing. Most of the people are failing in the 80s, 90s. You need glasses to read. But for some reason, let's say you in the 90s, you have a great eyesight. That's a great eyesight, means you have a very good and strong eye sensitivity. You thought about it, I'm lucky. I have good karma, I have a great eye sensitivity. Others, most of the people need glasses and so on. Just by thinking about that eyesight, you feel pleasant. That is why eye sensitivity is a mental object in that way. Now you can construct cases for the ear and the nose and the tongue and the body. So there are 5 of them. And another one is water element. Okay? Mahabhuta, 4 primaries: earth, wind, fire, and water. Earth, wind, and fire is very obvious and distinct to experience. Water element, cohesion. Cohesion is you can't actually directly experience. It's a construct, cohesion. Nature of cohesion is a construct. So, water element, you can project your mind. building scenarios, cohesion and dispersion, and so on and so forth. You know how cohesions operate. That is mental object. Another one is, let's call it two because they are as a pair. Masculinity and femininity. That one, we are not actually talking about the organs of male and female. Masculinity and femininity. There's a certain way it moves, a certain way it talks, a certain way it behaves. You have to have a mental construct. X chromosome, Y chromosome. That's what it gives the masculinity and femininity. That's a mental object. And also Hadaya Vittu, the heart base, or the heart phenomenon. It's not the real heart, as we all know, and that is also mental object, heart phenomenon. Space, mental object. Life faculty, okay. Life faculty, Jivi Indriya. There are two of them, physical life faculty and mental life faculty. That is the mental object. And when you are in meditation, when your meditation is good, you feel the lightness, you feel the softness, pliability, adaptability of both body and mind. Those are mental objects. You're meditating, you feel like you're floating. That's a mental construct. So, those are 16 of them. They are all have a rupa base, but they are so fine and so subtle, you cannot directly touch, feel, see. But in the mind can experience it. 16 subtle physical phenomena are mental objects. It's written in the scripture. So that's a physical. And of course there's a mental. Mental is simple cetasika, mental factors. 52 mental factors are mental object. Nibbana, nirvana, is a mental object. Concept, or you can call it conceptual objects, piññati, they are mental object. So all are written with precision in the scripture what mental object is. But its best is your memory recalls mental objects, fantasies mental objects, fictions mental objects. For practical purpose, that's a way to deal with the mental objects. So this is only the mental object. Excuse me. The next one is base. Okay. Mind base. Mana yatana. The object has to strike the base. Mind base. Mana yatana. Mana is mind. Yatana. Ayatana is base. Mana yatana, mind base. So mental object strike the mind base, just like The sound strike the ear base, the form strike the eye base. Just like that, mental object strike the mind base. So what is this mind base? Mind base actually is the life continuum. If you remember the Pali word, or do you remember the Pali word for life continuum? It is bhavinga, life continuum. Life continuum, bhavinga, is the mind base. So when the mental object strike the bhavinga, life continuum, mind base, that bhavinga, or it's a consciousness, it shakes for 3 times. In other words, 3 bhavinga arises and passes away. It shook for 3 times and it ceased. It stopped. Bhavinga stopped in 3 thought moments. Then a thought process arises. After the bhavinga ceases, a thought process arises. In that thought process, you will see the functional consciousness, resultant consciousness, full and active consciousness. Okay. You will see these things. This full and active consciousness, Pali, is javana, or in English, impulsion, full and active consciousness. Or you can simply say is thinking consciousness. Pali, manovinyana, arises. Mental object strike the mind base, life continuum. After 3 thought moments, this manovinyana, thinking consciousness, arises. Without a very strong life continuum, this active or thinking consciousness cannot arise. If bhavinga is very weak, these active consciousness cannot arise. Let's say a person is unconscious, fell down and feel unconscious. At that moment, no active consciousness arises. I'll venture to say a person is in a coma. No active consciousness can arise because the bhavinga, life continuum, is very weak. So that is the mind base. Mental object, mind base, and manovinyana, thinking consciousness, 3 of them. So phassa, mental contact. Mental contact arises from the combination of the mental object, mind base, and full and active consciousness. The combination of the 3 is mental contact. This mental contact of the mind gives rise to feeling born out of mind contact. So basically what we were talking about is the whole process, how the mental manovinyana, thinking consciousness arises, how the mind contact works, what are the mental objects, and what are the mind base. you need to understand each and every one of them, as it is not like in physical source or physical sense. So mental contact of the mind give rise to feeling born out of mental contact for the sixth sense. So 6 types of feelings arises based on the 6 kinds of consciousness. But each of them has pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral kind, 3 kinds. So you can say there are 18 kinds of feelings, Vedana. There are altogether 18 kinds of feelings, Vedana. So this is all about mental contact and feeling. May all of you be able to understand this 6th link. Because of the mental contact as condition, feeling arises clearly and be able to apply in your practice whenever suitable, correctly, as soon as possible. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you very much.